My name is Professor Maximus Monaheng Sefotho of the University of Johannesburg, and I'm presenting a book co-edited by myself and Professor Ronel Ferreira of the University of Pretoria. This is volume 2 of the Opening Eyes series of books. The volume is about teaching learners with visual impairment. The book provides teachers with learning strategies and activities for supporting students who are blind or visually impaired. There are 4 sections of the book and chapters that provide rich, current, and relevant information. The authors of the chapters are specialists in the field of visual impairment and other disabilities with extensive experience. Watching this video is an invitation to you to enter into a conversation with the authors. Together with you, we intend to identify strategies for further reading and research in visual impairment, as well as familiarization with visual impairment. Section 1 is about transforming the school. Chapter 1 in this section is on instructional leadership for transformational change, learner achievement, and care. In this chapter, Mrs. Hestel Viljoen, a knowledgeable former principal of Prince of School for the Visually Impaired, shares her extensive experience with principals of schools for visually impaired learners, as well as those aspiring to lead such schools. The chapter focuses on the school principal as instructional leader who can influence and drive transformational change, setting a clear direction to improve quality achievement, support, and care for learners with visual impairment. Section 2 is on assessment and support. Chapter 2 is on assessment, screening, diagnosis, and referral of learners with visual impairment. Dr. Hilda Muguludi opens this section by awakening awareness to assessment and support of learners with visual impairment. Assessment is generally a challenge, let alone for learners with visual impairment. The chapter addresses various suitable assessment approaches and strategies that may be implemented with learners with visual impairment to identify and diagnose learners with visual impairment. Special focus is given to the South African screening, identification, assessment, and support, popularly known as the SIAS policy. Chapter 3 is on assistive technology assessment and the development of an individual support plan. In this chapter, Maria Ramalho, who is the director of the Disability Unit of the University of Pretoria with vast experience in disability issues, takes you through the journey with assistive technology and individual support plans. These plans are critical in supporting learners with visual impairment. This chapter addresses some basic approaches that any teacher can use to start integrating assistive technologies for curriculum differentiation in line with the universal design for learning. Chapter 4 is on teachers providing learner support to learners with visual impairment in challenging contexts. In this chapter, Dr. Anna Barbara Duplessis unpacks learner support for learners with visual impairment in challenging contexts, such as the one now we are living in, which is the era of the COVID-19 pandemic. One can only imagine what happens in the space of learning for learners with visual impairment. This chapter aims to foreground the multitude of possibilities for providing learner support to learners with visual impairment in all contexts, including challenging ones. Relevant and appropriate learner support involves role players in all capacities, supporting learners in physical, cognitive, emotional, social, vocational, and/or other areas in order for them to learn and develop according to their fullest potential. Section 3 is about classroom practice. In this section, Chapter 5 that opens the section is on teaching literacy and mathematics through Braille. Once again, Mrs. Estelle Viljoen journeys along to share her practical kernels of wisdom in teaching literacy and mathematics through Braille. The focus of this chapter is on Braille as a writing and reading medium for blind learners. Braille holds distinct value for learners to grasp mathematical concepts and obtain spatial understanding and awareness. And all of them would need to be inducted in being literate and doing mathematics through Braille. Chapter 6 is on practical approaches to curriculum differentiation for learners with visual impairment. Once again, Mrs. Viljoen continues to share practical approaches to curriculum differentiation for learners with visual impairment. This critical skill comes as second nature to her. The purpose of this chapter is to provide teachers with a practical perspective on the promotion of inclusive education in the classroom through curriculum differentiation. The 4 building blocks of curriculum differentiation, namely differentiating the classroom environment and/or management, differentiating the content, teaching methodologies, and differentiating assessment, are then adeptly discussed. Chapter 7 is on adaptation of learning and teaching support material and assessment of learners with visual impairment. In Chapter 7, Mrs. Viljoen shares skills that link to curriculum differentiation, that is adaptation of learning and teaching support material, and links with assessment dealt with by Dr. Mokhuludi. This chapter focuses on presenting learning and teaching support material, popularly known as LTSM, and assessment in accessible ways in the classroom, as well as for formal or external assessment. Examples of different approaches to adaptation are included, and so are the access arrangements for examination and reasonable accommodations and/or concessions that can be applied for in the case of learners with visual impairment. Chapter 8 is on assistive technology that may support learners with visual impairment. One of the specialists in the field, Mr. Juan Ewe, works at the Disability Unit of the University of Pretoria. He shares his experience on assistive technology and how it may be used to support learners with visual impairment. Today's world is the world of technology, without which the life of learners with visual impairment may be compromised. This chapter focuses on available technologies and adaptations that can be used to increase participation in the functional aspects of daily living, such as independence in terms of orientation and mobility. Some general guidelines are provided for consideration of assistive technologies when deciding on potential use or not for a specific learner. Section 4, which is supporting healthy social development, is the last section of the book. Chapter 9, that kicks off the section, is about the value of sports and cultural activities for learners with visual impairment. In this chapter, Mrs. M had a very experienced person in the field of disability and a veteran with knowledge in nurturing of young learners with disabilities, takes us through sport and brings to light an aspect most neglected, that learners with visual impairment enjoy sport like all others. This chapter highlights the benefits of learners with visual impairment to take part in sport and cultural activities. The chapter aims to provide teachers with knowledge and insight in terms of how teachers can adapt the sport and cultural environment to allow learners with visual impairment to participate equally with their classmates. Chapter 9 is about comprehensive sexual education for learners with visual impairment. In this chapter, Mr. Lindokuhle Ubisi, who works for the Department of Educational Psychology of the University of Pretoria, brings a wealth of knowledge in a very strategic and critical area of sexual education. The chapter focuses on the need for sexual education for all, especially issues of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer stroke questioning, asexual or sexually, two-spirited, and other, popularly known as the LGBTIQA2S+. The chapter recognizes that people with visual impairment are sexual and do embrace non-conforming sexualities. This is the book that will bring a wealth of knowledge for you. And this is an African resource emerging from day-to-day life of South Africans in their diversity. But it is a book that, in a great way, allows us to implement inclusive education for social justice. It is important for teachers of learners with visual impairment and all others who work in the field of visual impairment. This is about this book, and thank you and goodbye.